I think it's best illustrated by a teacher I saw a while back. She was teaching a lesson on mass and weight. And 5 minutes before the end of the lesson, she asked the students to explain on a little 3x5 index card the difference between mass and weight, a technique that many teachers use called an exit ticket. So at the end of the lesson, when the bell went, the teacher said to the students to leave and to hand in their exit tickets as they left. And then the teacher read through the exit tickets, and then she put them in the bin, which surprised me. And I asked her, why did you put them in the bin? She said, well, I know where to start tomorrow's lesson. I said, what did you learn? She said, they all got it right. I'm moving on. I said, what would you have done if they'd all got it wrong? She said, I'd have taught it again, but slower and louder. She said that's a joke. She said, I'd have taught it again in a different way. I said, what would you have done if half the students had answered correctly and half the students had answered incorrectly? She said, I would have kept two of the cards, one with a good answer, one with a not so good answer. And then I would begin tomorrow's lesson with these two cards on the visualizer, the document camera. And then I'd ask the students to vote for one or the other and take the discussion from there. I said, why didn't you give them the individual students' feedback? She said, I couldn't. They didn't write their names on the cards. I said, why didn't you get them to write their names on the cards? She said, that'd be really stupid. If I wanted to give individual feedback, I'd have got them to write their answers in their science notebooks, which already have their names written on them. And that's when I realized that what this teacher was doing is so smart. She wasn't doing data-driven decision-making. She was doing decision-driven data collection. She just wanted to decide where to start tomorrow's lesson. And she wanted to collect the least burdensome amount of information that would help her make that decision in a smarter way. She did not want to spend 30 minutes giving students individual feedback on those 30 exit tickets. She wanted a quick read on the whole class's understanding so that she could make a good decision for the learning needs of the whole class. In other words, she started with a decision and then figured out what data, what evidence will help me make that decision in a smarter way. And I think it's important to clarify these two terms, data and evidence, because data is anything. It's numbers, it's words, it's anything that people say. It becomes evidence when it's used in support of a claim. So when you say that a certain piece of data has a particular meaning, then data becomes evidence. And so the important thing is it's just data until you decide it has a meaning, and then it's evidence. But the important point is start with the decisions, then you'll always know what to do with the evidence that you get. If you haven't got any clear idea, then it's just data. It's just numbers sitting there waiting for somebody to give them some meaning by asking a particular question. And that's why we see so many schools drowning in data, but with very little information, because they collected the data without any clear purpose in mind.
My examples from the classroom as well. Mine's rather than being collecting evidence at the end of the lesson or data to use as evidence at the end of the lesson, it's actually collecting during the lesson. So I'm thinking of a class I went to see of 17-year-olds who were studying geography, and their teacher, Heidi, had them doing a peer assessment exercise because they'd come almost to the end of a project they were doing. And so she put them into groups of 3, and they were taking each other's folder and going through it. And 2 of them were giving guidance to the other student. What Heidi was doing was going around with a piece of paper, listening in to what was being said. Rarely did she intervene with what was going on. It was more that she was actually picking up information from what the students were giving to one another to then decide at the end of the lesson what she was going to do in terms of summing up the lesson. So she was actually, just as Dylan's explained, collecting evidence of what was going on in order to use it at the end of the lesson to draw everybody back onto that pathway that she wanted for learning. So these sorts of activities happen when teachers are planning how to get assessment to run alongside the learning, so that assessment really does inform the learning. And that's why it's a much better way taking it from the decision making than to actually just collect the data, as some teachers do. It's not for accountability, it's for actually informing the learning.
I think it's important to note that this is often a feature of teaching in Japanese classrooms, for example. In American classrooms, in British classrooms, teachers often try to help individual students. In Japanese classrooms, teachers will walk up and down the aisles looking at what the students are doing, but they'll be planning what to do with the whole class. And I know that many schools in England are now experimenting and exploring this idea of whole class feedback, which is far more effective. It doesn't get everybody, but the important point is it's better to try to put the class's learning in one go for the whole class before you resort to individualized one-to-one help, because often you can put a lot of kids back on the right track in one go rather than having to individualize everything.